Shout out to Idaho State for making an interesting game from start to finish. For UNLV fans, that was pretty ugly to start the Dan Mullen era. This was a game that it just seemed like the Rebels can never get a rhythm and keep it going. A lot of question marks. I don't prefer the two quarterback system. I think Calandra looked more consistent. Alex Orje didn't really get the opportunity to do too much. It started off bad when they're driving down to score and he fumbles in the end zone and it's a touchback going the other way for the Bengals. This is a team that was hesitant to pass the ball, but Jaden Thomas is definitely their guy. He's got to be the best running back in the conference, one of the best running backs in the country. When they hand him the ball, he can make plays, pretty special. The defense was spotty. Bengals were lining up the secondary for most of the game, despite Idaho State's quarterback throwing 4 picks. It's kind of deceptive because it seems like they're having their way pretty much the whole first half. They're running the ball well. The middle linebackers were nowhere to be found. Diving into this game, through the first quarter, UNLV was just looking a complete mess. Went down 10-0. Finally scored with Jaden Thomas. I think Jaden Thomas had 3 touchdowns through the first half. He came up big for them. I would have to say, inconsistencies and, lack of discipline was the highlight for UNLV. Their home opener against, Idaho State, who they clearly really weren't prepared for, and I don't think they're expecting Coach, Cody Hawkins to do some trickery and catch them off guard, and it worked well for the Bengals through most of the game. Clearly, there was a skill, athleticism disadvantage for the Bengals, but they found a way to overcome it and really had UNLV on the ropes for pretty much the whole game. The Bengals threw 3-4 picks, and UNLV just couldn't really keep themselves above water for most of the game. They would make a good play, and then they would get a taunting penalty going for them, and 15-yard penalty kept the drive going for the Bengals. UNLV missed a pair of field goals in this game. Defensively, just non-existent, and besides those, crucial turnovers that came at the right moment, which was great, they were getting shredded really in the secondary, and Brooks, the running back for the Bengals, he was able to have their way with them, for the most of, this third quarter, just driving. I say it again, 24-point dogs, and it ends up being a touchdown game through the final minutes of the fourth quarter. Overreactions for UNLV is this is a team that's nowhere near ready to challenge for a Mountain West title. This is a team that's going to lose, 3-4 games. This is a team that's probably not going to be ready to compete with Boise State. They may get, taken advantage of against UCLA. Quarterback struggles. They do have a running game, and they're going to have to rely on it way more than they did. I feel like they didn't really trust the quarterbacks to put it in their hands. These designed QB runs just weren't really working, and when they were, you could see that it was against an FCS school, and that's not going to be able to work against, the rest of the conference. Taking a breath and calming down and realizing this is the, first game of the season, first game under the Dan Mullen era. They have the talent, the skill set and everything. They're going to have to get going and figure out what they're about and how to win games. And I feel like Hopefully they don't rely on the 2 QB system very long and just go ahead and pick a guy and stick it out with him. This is a team that can be just as dangerous, but also, self-detrimental to what they're trying to accomplish. You can't have these taunting plays. You can't miss field goals. There were some questionable calls, of course. I think there was a drive when Idaho State was going down and the receiver caught it, but it looked like his foot was touched out of bounds. That was, they upheld that, and then the very next play, they give him a PI call, which a completely uncatchable ball ends up going for Idaho State, and they keep the drive going, and that's how they end up scoring. I feel like there was a lot of questionable calls against the UNLV, but at the same time, they should not be competing with Idaho State. It should be a blowout through the first, quarter, first half, and they kept them in it the entire game, and that's mostly on the Rebels' fault and coaching and figuring out how to limit the Bengals' possessions offensively. I believe UNLV's never going to look as bad as they did right here and now. The weeks to follow, they're going to be way more improved, and they're going to find themselves. Do we hold off on possibly spoilers against Boise State and playoff talks and Mountain West title hopes and all this? It will probably take a pause on it and reassess, take it game by game, get your offense really rolling. When in doubt, rely on Jaden Thomas to get you through those tough drives. Defensively, they're going to go back to the drawing board and try and figure out what went wrong so badly in week 0. 31-38, UNLV takes the win. Ugly, unfortunate way of doing it, but they get the win, they get the dub, and they move forward into the rest of the season.